When I was inside cable news in 2002, there was a huge anti-war movement with mass demonstrations in this country and the world. And the leaders of those demonstrations couldn't get inside the studio. But I was instructed at one point to interview the leader of the Free Martha Stewart movement for 2 full segments on MSNBC. And I said to him, well, how big was your demonstration this morning? And he said, well, we had 8 people there. So the fact that this kind of fringe celebrity story can take up hour after hour, but a story that affects the future of the world, war, peace, and an anti-war movement that was very informed, but their leaders could not appear inside a cable news studio. That's the reason we need a serious channel like Independent World Television. From having been on the inside, I know how important it is that we have a channel that can cover the stories we could not cover. The Media Watch group that I founded, FAIR, did a survey of America's premier news show, Nightline, and found that for every time a labor union spokesperson was on that show, there were 7 corporate representatives. FAIR has done surveys of public television, which has business show after business show after investor show, and not one labor show, ever. Independent World Television is important because it will give voice to millions of Americans who work for a living. Most people in our country earn their income from a wage or a salary. They don't earn their income from stock investments. And there's a huge hole in American television where they cater to the elite, the heavy investor, or the business manager. But the working person, the middle-class professional, they don't have a voice. And Independent World Television will talk about workplace issues, workers' rights, what unions are doing. And oddly, leaders of unions might actually appear on screen. There's a huge audience hungering to hear dissenting and independent voices on television, but they can't find them now. FAIR has done survey after survey of who gets on TV and who doesn't. Before the Gulf War, FAIR surveyed all the network news shows, the nightly shows, and found that only 1% of the sources were anti-war. And only one leader of an anti-war group was heard in a 2-week period. That contrasted with 7 Super Bowl football players that were asked to give their opinion. The amount of anti-war voices, which was 1.5%, that it was equivalent to the number of people that got on TV to comment on how the Gulf War had interfered with their travel plans. When you find such little dissent on American TV, such little genuine debate, then you see why there will be millions of people hungering for Independent World Television. If you're a journalist, and I was, whose paycheck came from General Electric or Rupert Murdoch, as my paycheck did, you learn that there are certain stories that just won't be helpful to your career. Certain environmental stories won't help you. Certain stories about war profiteering won't help your career. Certainly stories about media conglomeration, which is a major issue in the United States, will not help your career. So you learn as a journalist to self-censor. I used to complain at MSNBC, why do these military analysts and these weapons experts go on without any alternative voice? There's never a balancing voice. And what they told the American public was wrong. A weapons inspector who was a clear dissenting voice, like Scott Ritter, disappeared from television as the war approached. And when I was at MSNBC, there kept being a smear that was going around that Scott Ritter was covertly taking funds from the government of Saddam Hussein. And I knew it was a smear, but it did hurt. It was aimed at keeping him off of the air. Ironically, we learned a couple years later that at about that same time, the Bush administration was funding covertly pundits who were getting on these same channels, pundits like Armstrong Williams. So when you look back at the war, the build-up to the war, at MSNBC, they were scared witless that there might be too many opposing voices, so they got rid of them. And a memo circulated when the Phil Donahue show was canceled. And that memo said that Phil Donahue represents, I'm reading from an internal memo, never supposed to be public. Donahue represents a difficult public voice for NBC in a time of war. He seems to delight in presenting guests who are anti-war, anti-Bush, and skeptical of the administration's motives, unquote. Now, I went into journalism because I thought the job of a journalist in a free society was to present skeptics. This NBC memo went on to describe their nightmare scenario where, quote, Donahue will become the home for the liberal anti-war agenda at the same time that our competitors will be waving the flag at every opportunity, unquote. If you watched MSNBC, no one waved the flag more than they did. They even outfoxed Fox. And when you're a journalist using your energy to wave the flag mindlessly, you don't have time to do your job or energy to do your job in a free society, which is to ask the tough questions before the bombs start dropping. For 20 years, I've been given schemes to start new television channels. The first that I've come across that made a lot of sense is Independent World Television, because it aims at doing the essential, which is to change the economics of journalism. Take journalists, free journalists from corporate and government funding. And in the past, I saw schemes that pointed toward that direction, but they didn't have the technology to do it. We now have the ability to launch an independent news channel because the technology is there. You can produce programming, quality programming, inexpensively because the video editing, video shooting, transmitting video is just, the costs have plummeted. But more importantly, we have this new thing called the internet. And the internet allows us to get across two big hurdles. Number one is capital. How do you, in the past, we could never compete with the Murdochs and the General Electrics who were launching news channels. Now with the internet and internet fundraising demonstrated by grassroots groups like Move On or political campaigns like Howard Dean's, we've shown that millions of middle-class people, each kicking in 25 or 50 bucks, you can raise millions of dollars. And that's how Independent World Television can break that chain free of how do we raise the capital. And the second thing that the internet has allowed us to do is to, in those cable operators that don't see their way clear that this will be profitable, we have a way of organizing to let them know that there are thousands and thousands of viewers in their areas that want to watch this new channel, so please put it on the air. And with the internet, we have the ability, something that was unthinkable 10 years ago, is to be able to bring eyeballs. You can use the internet to market through viral marketing and sending out emails with our video, showing people the kind of programming they're missing. And by the way, you can find it on channel 83 on Comcast and channel 282 on Time Warner, and we can actually bring the eyeballs to the television screen. The internet is a crucial source of alternative information, but it's also a vehicle to bring people to the dominant medium, which remains television, but a new kind of television, which Independent World Television will show us. Another key innovation of Independent World Television is that it crosses borders, US, Canada, England, through the English-speaking world. And if you cross borders, which the internet does beautifully, it means you can spread audience and fundraising across borders. So it's innovation that'll help the network grow, but especially will help us grow in the most important place, which is the center, unfortunately, of the global empire, is the United States. And this international support for a cable channel that'll have such a focus on the events in Washington is crucial. In a very bleak television and radio landscape in the United States, there are bright spots, and the brightest spot is Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! They've become the most successful independent TV and radio show, and they pick up new radio and TV stations, but they're generally small. Imagine if Amy Goodman was on a cable news channel every night in prime time with a couple million viewers competing with Fox News, and she's bringing on experts that don't get on television. She's breaking stories that don't get broken on American television. They don't get addressed. That's the kind of fantasy that can become reality when Independent World Television launches.